Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for spending your valuable time with the Adapt 2030 channel. Ukraine's now telling us there will be no winter wheat and no corn. So where are African nations predominantly going to get their imports from? As we swing through the global report on food crisis 2022, these nations specifically are going to have some problems. They already do. So what happens when export controls on medical supplies swing into export control on food? Winter crops not going to be there. Ukraine officially announcing, so German farmers also warning in nitrogen fertilizers. So maybe we'll have to do like they did motorbike racing in Spain. Reach out and snag a bag of rice as you swoop by. And remember, you need to obscure the art of war. Things are being obscured. I think there's a ratio here. The more the general populace understands that food shortages are in, the greater the distraction, the greater the masking. The veil needs to increase in thickness, just like it did. This is a World War II image here of how ships were separated so they could operate without being visible. Same thing. The food shortages will not be visible. There will be worldwide events as excuses why the food is not deliverable. And the finger pointing right here from the head of the International Energy Agency, warning European countries against scrambling themselves for their own energy security this winter that will threaten to shatter EU unity. So what's being said clearly is you as an independent nation are not allowed to have your leaders go out and secure resources for your individuals in that nation. You can't. The ship goes down, everybody goes down with it. So I'm curious how this is going to move forward. There's some just riveting revelations coming out now about food production just not going to be there. So how will this shake the world? And as I said in the opener, the distractions are going to get more intense as we move down this timeline here. They have to distract because global panic is on the way. And we'll jump over to the Food Security Information Network, an arm and a branch of the UN Global Food Report 2022. They dive right in with the acute food insecurity estimates in Central and Southern Africa. Now I linked everything in the description box because it's a 277-page PDF, but I just pulled the maps I thought were most relevant here. So what they're showing you in the different colorations is the number of people in crisis in each individual nation that if food is cut off even 1/5 of 1/8 of 1% more, they are going into levels that we really haven't seen in this chapter of human history before. So you can get a good gauge right there, Democratic Republic of Congo. And if we move into Western Africa, Nigeria, also Ghana having some problems there. But these color maps will change as we move through and Ukraine is not able to export out to these nations any longer with any reliable basis on that. Before we start, just a quick word from our sponsor. It's true carnage in the stock market, unlike anything we've seen. The average stock is down 41.7% from its 52-week high. More interest rates are expected. Meanwhile, gold is down only 8%, so it's proven to be a source of protecting wealth and a hedge against inflation. Call the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. Patriot Gold Group has a no-fee-for-life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold or silver, and you may qualify for the no-fee-for-life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Give them a call, 888-546-7020 to get your free investor guide today. And now on with the video. Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, but Eritrea taking care of itself over there. They don't have a forecast. And if we want to widen that out to what you consider Eurasia, got Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, and there's going to be some other nations that will be joining this really quickly here. Now Myanmar, which also shows Bangladesh and Cox's Bazar, that border is not exactly correct there, depending on if you want to go international borders. But Myanmar can double its food production capacity. They're not even using 50% of their arable land at the moment, so they can indeed take production further out. So if you want to look at it in a bar chart graphic here, Here you go. This is the most affected places, and these will extend further into insecurity, and that list will go down into 50, 60, 70, 100 by the end of the next 6 months or so as we come in through this winter, and then they'll get a gauge of what's not grown. So information is really starting to become much more forthcoming now. I mean, you can do simple math and start to say, whoa, there's not going to be enough resources to produce the food or process the food. That's just in Europe on the electricity side, but then you got the grains themselves coming out of Ukraine, and a lot of good numbers coming out on staggeringly below normal temperatures across the southern hemisphere that will dent production of grains in the southern hemisphere. So you start to add all this up, and wait a minute, there's barge snafu, superglued supply chains that probably won't alleviate somewhere till April or further out into next year. It's looking at the perfect storm. So just even nations that are semi-insulated from what's about to happen will definitely feel the effects. Now the U.S. will be one of the last nations that's going to get hit, but when it hits, we have run the gauntlet and there is nowhere else to run to at all. Once it hits the United States, the rest of the world is completely enveloped. So if that puts you at ease, if you're in a food-producing nation, the only problem is the supply chain lockup and the logistics of getting chemical inputs, farm inputs to your nations. That's one big thing to contend with coming up, starting now. For the importers of food, best of luck, because you're going to have to think way outside the box on how to get that food to nations. But again, with every problem, the solution is where the opportunity is, and we're going to need a myriad of solutions to, work through these things that are right in front of us. We're at the wall right here, and it's starting to hit. Like I said before, and I'll still stand by it, by the end of the year in December 31st, not like December 1st, we are going to have digital rationing cards on this planet for access to food. And then this next report here was also linked in the references for the previous global report on food. I thought, okay, well, it links me back to a 2021 report on global risks. Now this is WEF here, and I wanted to see what the risks were, obviously. Geomagnetic disruption. This is the whole thing I've been talking about forever that is now bending the cloud cells and jet streams, affecting food production globally, and here they have it on their list. I was flabbergasted, but thank you for bringing it to everybody's attention. Now, it gets a little traction as being valid. So just an early warning for you. This one came off Fertilizer Daily, although this was an exclusive for them, apparently with one of their interviews on nitrogen fertilizer with a Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine. I thought I need to see what this says immediately here. Unfortunately, nitrogen fertilizer are very expensive now and cost more because they require a large amount of natural gas input. That's all disrupted. And in blue, this is the most important sentence you could read this year, possibly. There will be no winter wheat coming out of Ukraine. And from the summer, it's going to be oriented toward sunflower oil, some niche crops, but not corn. So I had to do a double take when I saw that. They just admitted there will be no winter wheat coming out of Ukraine and no corn. Now where does that leave all the other nations that are importing and expecting imports from Ukraine? They were, before all of this happened in the beginning of the year, the world's largest exporter of grains outbound to these African nations. Where's that going to come from? You just can't print corn. You can't print wheat. You can print all the money you want. But see, this comes right back into the biggest problem again, which I had been told about a couple of different times in different ways and fashions. The market's going to break its pricing mechanism where there'll be a bid or a price on paper somewhere on a traditional market like we see now. But there will be others out there that will pay more in cash. And then the next person will upbid that and pay more in cash. And you're going to basically go to a cash market compared to any what we know as traditional markets, futures markets, because it'll really just boil down to who has the most money can buy it. We're coming into a very limited amount of supply of grains. Won't be enough to feed everybody on the planet. So this is where the distractions are going to get bigger. Like the more awareness there is of this type of article out here, the greater the distractions are going to be to, explain away why the food's not available. So something bigger has to happen to explain away this. And the reduction of fertilizer production, there's no natural gas. You actually need the gas. You don't need the electricity. You need the carbon and the hydrogen to rip it apart to get those chemical processes to create the product. You can't create the product from electricity. You actually need the natural gas as the base product to then rip apart and reassemble. Without that, we just don't have the farm inputs for next year. So in a little bit more context to the article here, next year the sowing of winter crops may not take place in Ukraine because of the rise of the price of nitrogen fertilizers. So they're not talking about disruptions in, the conflict going on there. They're talking about just purely nitrogen fertilizer, too expensive, non-available, can't plant. Then if we go down to paragraph number 2, they're concerned also about the volume of future Ukrainian exports of grain crops down to where? African and Asian nations. They're already talking about political upheaval. This definitely does not bode well for those nations that are importing. So then I would say, all right, well, you think more producing nations would be better off, right? German farmers warned of nitrogen fertilizer shortages. Okay, we knew that was inbound anyway. I mean, they've shut down so many plants. I really hope they can get them open again here next year sometime, because we will be in a global famine if they cannot. We need that production out of their chemical facilities. But in the article also, because they will not have enough nitrogen fertilizer next year, they're already looking at a drop in yields in Germany by 30 to 40%. This is one of the major grain producers in Europe. Let that sink in for a second, because I'm just going to swing you over here to the World Bank with their export controls on medical supplies and medicines that occurred during 2020 to 2021. So wherever you see a colored nation on this map, they ceased all exports of medical goods supplies. What happens when this same map is just turned over into food? And there is no export, or there are export controls on food with every single nation that you see marked on this map. Then what? Because with these supply chains globally super glued together right now with very little hope of getting them unlocked before April, these nations are going to have to put their heads out like motorbike racing in Spain and reach out and hopefully grab a bag of grain on the way by and flick it back over to the driver and hope for the best on round number 2. This is such an interesting photo. Like, you would not really get away with doing this today. But think about going that fast and then trying to grab a bag of grain. That's where the world is going to in months, not years. And I do talk more about this along with Ransom Godwin every Thursday night, 10 p.m. to midnight, our show on Revolution Radio. We're streaming out to 8 different sites as well across the video platforms: Rumble, BitChute, LinkedIn, 2 different YouTube channels, Vigilante TV. So hope you can join us there to be part of the conversation. All the links for tonight's video are in the description box below, so you can chase down and do some of your own research on this too. Maybe you can put a forecast out there. How do you think the grains are going to flow based on historical exports, lack of nitrogen fertilizers, how we can see everything locking up? I am totally interested if anybody has another idea of how grains are going to flow, where they're going to be limited first, which nations will be affected most, how prices are going to rise, where the civil unrest will start first. That's like the base layer of things to think about when you're moving forward with these grains. Appreciate you watching. Hope you got something out of the video, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.